This video contains audio content only. There are no visual elements or images accompanying the audio. If you're expecting to see video footage, please note that this is an intentional audio-only presentation. We recommend listening to this content rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding and enjoy the audio. Welcome to this exploration of a deeply complex and often overlooked aspect of American history. The lives and experiences of children born to enslaved black women and white masters in the antebellum South. We will delve into the multifaceted realities faced by these individuals and their families, shedding light on the social, legal, and personal challenges they navigated within a system built on racial hierarchy and exploitation. Prepare to journey into the heart of the Plantation South, where power and vulnerability intersected in the most intimate and devastating ways. We will examine the brutal institution of slavery and the pervasive sexual exploitation of enslaved women, exposing the hypocrisy and moral compromises that permeated the social fabric of the time. We'll explore how the very architecture of plantation life reinforced this vulnerability, from the imposing presence of the master's house to the cramped and unsanitary conditions of the slave quarters. Through this exploration, we will uncover the hidden truths of slave family life, whispered in the quarters and passed down through generations. We'll examine the resilience and resourcefulness of enslaved families who, despite the constant threat of separation and violence, created their own rituals, traditions, and networks of support. We'll delve into the complexities of mixed-race parentage, the coded language used to acknowledge these relationships, and the precarious social standing of mixed-race children within the enslaved community. We will also examine the legal and social status of mixed-race offspring, exploring the devastating impact of laws like *partus sequitur ventrum*, which condemned children born to enslaved mothers to a life of servitude regardless of their paternity. We'll explore the concept of pigmentocracy and the complex social dynamics it created within the enslaved community, examining how skin tone influenced social standing and access to opportunities. We will delve into the psychological and emotional challenges faced by mixed-race individuals, caught between two worlds and struggling to define their identity within a system that offered no space for their complex heritage. We will explore the agonizing choice between embracing one's black heritage or attempting to pass as white, a decision fraught with danger and the potential for heartbreak. We will also shed light on the societal silence that surrounded the plight of enslaved mothers and their children. We will examine the role of white women, often complicit in this silence due to social pressure and economic dependence, and explore the unwritten rules that governed relationships between white men and enslaved women. Finally, we will examine the enduring impact of slavery on families and communities, exploring the concept of intergenerational trauma and its ongoing manifestations in the social, economic, and psychological landscape of Black lives in America. We will explore the fight for reparations and racial justice as a direct response to this enduring trauma, a testament to the ongoing struggle to heal the wounds of the past and build a more equitable future. By the end of this article, you will have a deeper understanding of the complex and often heartbreaking realities faced by children born to enslaved Black women and white masters. You will gain insight into the strength and resilience of enslaved families, the enduring legacy of slavery, and the ongoing fight for racial justice in America. Prepare to be challenged, moved, and inspired by the stories of those who navigated the brutal realities of slavery and whose legacy continues to shape our world today. Chapter 1. Beneath the Master's Gaze: The Vulnerable Lives of Enslaved Women. The sun beat down on the sprawling fields of the southern plantations, its oppressive heat a constant reminder of the relentless labor demanded of the enslaved. But for the women toiling amongst the cotton plants, the sun's glare was not the only oppressive force they endured. Their lives were interwoven with a profound vulnerability, a constant awareness of the predatory gaze of the men who held them in bondage. They were not merely laborers, but bodies deemed property, subject to the whims and desires of their masters. The expectation of sexual availability permeated every aspect of their existence, weaving a suffocating tapestry of fear, uncertainty, and dehumanization. The very architecture of plantation life reinforced this vulnerability. The master's house, a symbol of dominance and control, cast a long shadow over the slave quarters, a constant reminder of the power imbalance that governed their lives. Enslaved women lived under the ever-present threat of sexual violence, not just from their masters, but from their sons, overseers, and any other white man who wielded authority on the plantation. The law offered no shield, no protection against these violations. The rape of an enslaved woman was not a crime in the eyes of the legal system. Instead, it was viewed as a trespass against the master's property rights, a chilling testament to the extent to which these women were stripped of their personhood. Harriet Jacobs, writing under the pseudonym Linda Brent, offers a searing account of this reality in her narrative, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Jacobs describes the pervasive fear that gripped enslaved women, the knowledge that their bodies were not their own. She recounts the story of her own master, a man who fathered 11 children with enslaved women, a fact whispered in hushed tones among the enslaved community, never spoken aloud for fear of brutal reprisal. These whispers, these shared secrets, served as a grim testament to the widespread nature of sexual exploitation on plantations and the pervasive fear that silenced its victims. The lack of legal protection left enslaved women with little recourse against sexual assault. The legal system, designed to uphold the institution of slavery, actively participated in their dehumanization. It rendered them voiceless, their suffering unseen and unacknowledged. This denial of basic human rights compounded the trauma of sexual violence, leaving deep psychological scars that reverberated through generations. The constant threat of violence, both sexual and physical, shaped the daily lives of enslaved women. They navigated a treacherous landscape, constantly seeking ways to protect themselves and their children. Some sought to build strategic alliances with other enslaved individuals, creating a network of support and shared resilience. Others attempted to gain favor with the wives of their masters, hoping that this precarious alliance might offer some degree of protection. These strategies, born of desperation, offered glimpses of the women's agency, their determination to carve out a space of resistance within a system designed to crush their spirits. The living conditions of enslaved women further amplified their vulnerability. Cramped and unsanitary quarters offered little privacy or comfort. Their work routines were grueling, demanding long hours of backbreaking labor in the fields, tending to crops from sunup to sundown. Even within the confines of the master's house, where some enslaved women worked as domestic servants, the threat of sexual exploitation loomed large. Despite the constant assault on their dignity and personhood, enslaved women found ways to maintain a sense of self. They created communities within the confines of the plantation, sharing stories, songs, and traditions that affirmed their humanity. They nurtured their families, providing love and support in the face of unimaginable hardship. They practiced their faith, finding solace and strength in their spiritual beliefs. These acts of resilience, both large and small, served as a powerful counterpoint to the dehumanizing forces of slavery. The stories of enslaved women like Sally Hemings, who bore several children fathered by Thomas Jefferson, reveal the complex and often fraught relationships that could develop between enslaved women and their masters. Hemings's unique position, traveling to France with Jefferson and his family, where she was technically free under French law, afforded her a degree of agency rarely experienced by enslaved women. She negotiated her return to enslavement at Monticello in exchange for extraordinary privileges for herself and the promise of freedom for her children, a testament to her courage and strategic thinking. However, her story also underscores the precarious nature of such negotiations, as she remained enslaved in Virginia and her freedom ultimately depended on Jefferson's will. The experiences of enslaved women were not monolithic. Some women, like Mary Chestnut, a white diarist who lived on a plantation, offered glimpses into the world of enslaved women from their perspective, albeit filtered through the lens of their own biases. Chestnut's diary entries, while revealing the pervasive sexual exploitation of enslaved women, also highlight the ways in which white women often turned a blind eye to the suffering of those around them. The narratives of enslaved women, fragmented and incomplete as they may be, offer a crucial window into the brutal realities of slavery. They reveal the constant threat of violence, the denial of basic human rights, and the profound psychological toll of living under constant surveillance. But these narratives also reveal the extraordinary resilience of these women, their unwavering determination to maintain their dignity and personhood in the face of dehumanization. Their stories, whispered in secret, passed down through generations, serve as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and a powerful indictment of the institution of slavery. They remind us that the history of slavery is not just a story of oppression, but also a story of resistance, of courage, and of the enduring power of hope. Chapter 2. The Seeds of Injustice, Power, Privilege, and Paternity in the Plantation South. The brutal institution of slavery thrived on a foundation of absolute power wielded by white male slave owners. This power extended far beyond the economic exploitation of forced labor. It permeated the most intimate spheres of the enslaved, allowing white men to exert sexual control over enslaved women with chilling impunity. The very notion of consent was rendered meaningless within the master-slave dynamic. An enslaved woman's acquiescence, even in instances where a relationship appeared less overtly coercive, was often a calculated survival tactic in a system where refusal could bring swift and brutal retribution. Beatings, separation from loved ones, or being sold away to an unknown fate were just some of the potential consequences of defiance. This systematic exploitation was not merely a product of individual depravity, but a consequence of deeply ingrained social norms and beliefs. The pervasive view of black women as inherently hypersexual, promiscuous by nature, served as a convenient justification for white male predation. This racist stereotype, coupled with the societal acceptance of white male dominance, created an environment where enslaved women were viewed as perpetually available for sexual gratification, their bodies deemed property to be used and abused at will. The tragic irony was that while white men freely exploited enslaved women, they simultaneously upheld a rigid ideology of white female purity and submissiveness, further entrenching the racial and gender hierarchies of the South. Enslaved women, facing this relentless assault on their bodies and dignity, navigated these power dynamics with a complex combination of resistance and strategic compliance. Acts of open defiance, while courageous, were often met with swift and brutal punishment. Many women, therefore, adopted strategies of subtle resistance, feigning illness, sabotaging work, or finding ways to control the pace of their labor. Others sought to build alliances with other enslaved individuals, creating networks of support and shared resilience. Still others attempted to gain favor with the wives of their masters, hoping for a precarious shield against the master's predatory advances. These strategies, born of desperation, offered glimpses of the women's agency, their unwavering determination to maintain a semblance of control within a system designed to strip them of all autonomy. The case of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson stands as a stark example of the complexities inherent in these relationships. Hemings, enslaved by Jefferson, occupied a unique position, having accompanied his daughter to Paris where, under French law, she was technically free. Upon Jefferson's return to America, Hemings, then pregnant, negotiated for extraordinary privileges for herself and the promise of freedom for her future children in exchange for her return to enslavement at Monticello. This negotiation, while demonstrating a remarkable degree of agency, also underscores the inherent limitations within the system. Hemings could bargain for certain concessions, but true, unconditional freedom remained beyond her grasp. While Jefferson largely adhered to his promise, eventually granting freedom to all of Hemings's children, this act of relative benevolence must be viewed within the larger context of his absolute power over her life and the lives of her children. Her experience, while offering a glimmer of hope, was a stark exception to the far more common and brutal experiences of countless other enslaved women who possessed no such leverage and endured a lifetime of sexual exploitation without recourse. The children born from these forced unions, regardless of their paternity, inherited their mother's enslaved status. This legal principle, known as *partus sequitur ventrum*, meaning, that which is brought forth follows the womb, formed a cornerstone of the institution of slavery. It ensured the perpetuation of slavery across generations, even for those children who appeared physically white. Enacted in Virginia in 1662 and later adopted by other colonies, this principle stood in stark contrast to English common law, which dictated that children inherited their father's status. This deliberate departure from established legal precedent served to solidify the racial hierarchy of the South and maximize the profits of slaveholders by increasing their human chattel. *partus sequitur ventrum* not only condemned mixed-race children to a life of servitude but also served to erase the paternity of white fathers, absolving them of any legal or moral responsibility for their offspring. This legal principle had devastating consequences for countless families, severing familial bonds and perpetuating the cycle of exploitation. The societal response to mixed-race children varied widely. Some white fathers acknowledged their paternity and provided their mixed-race offspring with certain privileges, such as education, skilled labor positions within the household, or even, in rare cases, manumission. However, more often than not, these children were treated as any other enslaved person, subject to the same brutal conditions and denied any claim to their father's lineage. The presence of mixed-race children on plantations created a complex social dynamic. Within the enslaved community, they were sometimes viewed with resentment, their lighter skin a constant reminder of the master's exploitation. Conversely, they might also be seen as possessing a certain advantage, their proximity to whiteness potentially affording them some protection or preferential treatment. Among white individuals, reactions ranged from quiet acknowledgement to outright denial. Some white women, like Mary Chestnut, privately acknowledged the pervasive sexual exploitation of enslaved women while simultaneously expressing disdain for the resulting mixed-race children. Regardless of their appearance or the attitudes of those around them, mixed-race children were ultimately subject to the same fundamental injustice as darker-skinned enslaved people: the denial of their basic human rights and the constant threat of violence. Their lighter skin, while potentially offering a superficial advantage in certain situations, could not shield them from the brutal realities of slavery. They were, in the end, enslaved, their lives governed by the same system of oppression that defined the plantation South. The plantation South was a world of stark contrasts and brutal contradictions, where the absolute power of white men intertwined with the pervasive vulnerability of enslaved women. The exploitation of enslaved women, fueled by racist ideologies and enabled by a legal system designed to protect the institution of slavery, left an indelible scar on American history. The stories of these women, their acts of resistance and resilience, their complex relationships with their masters, and the fates of their children, offer a chilling glimpse into the human cost of slavery and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Quarters: The Hidden Truths of Slave Family Life. The hushed intimacy of the slave quarters, the cramped spaces where enslaved families sought refuge from the relentless toil and dehumanizing gaze of the plantation, held secrets within its walls. These weren't the secrets of buried treasure or clandestine rebellions, but the intimate truths of kinship, parentage, and survival. Truths spoken in veiled language, coded communication, and furtive glances, understood only by those who shared the bonds of slavery. These whispers, born of necessity and steeped in resilience, wove a complex tapestry of family life in the face of unimaginable adversity. The reality of mixed-race parentage, a consequence of the unchecked power wielded by white masters, was an ever-present presence in the quarters. It was rarely spoken of openly, especially not in the hearing of white ears. Yet, within the relative safety of their own community, enslaved individuals developed subtle ways of acknowledging and discussing these relationships. A knowing glance, a whispered comment about a child's resemblance to the master or his sons. These were the coded messages that conveyed a shared understanding of the unspoken truth. One enslaved man recalled overhearing whispers among his fellow slaves about the master's children, noting their striking resemblance to him, despite the master's insistence they were fathered by Irish laborers on the plantation. This carefully maintained secrecy served as a shield against the potential repercussions of open acknowledgement, protecting both the enslaved mothers and their mixed-race children from the wrath of the master or the jealous scrutiny of his wife. Sometimes, the truth was cloaked in carefully constructed lies, as in the case of a master who accused a tutor of fathering a child with an enslaved woman, a thinly veiled attempt to deflect attention from his own actions. These whispers, these coded conversations, served as a testament to the enslaved community's ability to navigate the treacherous terrain of plantation life, preserving their dignity and protecting their own while subtly challenging the carefully constructed facade of propriety maintained by the slave-holding class. Family, in the crucible of slavery, became a beacon of hope and resilience. Enslaved men and women, denied the legal right to marry, created their own rituals and traditions, forging unbreakable bonds amidst the constant threat of separation. Jumping the broom, a centuries-old tradition with roots in West Africa, symbolized the commitment of two people to build a life together, even in bondage. Naming practices, often incorporating family names or names that reflected cultural heritage, served as a powerful affirmation of identity and lineage in a system designed to erase both. Stories, passed down through generations, became repositories of family history, cultural values, and ancestral knowledge, weaving a tapestry of connection that transcended the boundaries of the plantation. These stories, whispered in the darkness of the quarters, kept alive the memory of loved ones lost to the slave trade, celebrating their lives and preserving their legacy for future generations. The domestic slave trade, a brutal engine of family separation, cast a long shadow over the lives of enslaved people. The statistic that 30% of children in the Upper South were sold away from their families before 1860 paints a stark picture of the heartbreak and trauma inflicted by this system. Mothers were torn from their children, husbands ripped from their wives, siblings scattered across the vast expanse of the South, often never to see each other again. One enslaved woman recalled the agonizing moment she witnessed her own child being sold away, her cries echoing across the auction block, a sound that haunted her for the rest of her life. These separations, inflicted with callous disregard for human connection, were not simply emotional wounds. They were calculated acts of economic violence, designed to maximize the profits of slaveholders while simultaneously crushing the spirit of the enslaved. Yet, even in the face of such devastating loss, enslaved families exhibited extraordinary resilience. They clung fiercely to the memories of their loved ones, sharing stories and preserving family traditions in the hope of one day being reunited. Some, like Sally Hemings, found ways to leverage their unique circumstances to negotiate for a better future for their children. Hemings, while enslaved by Thomas Jefferson, accompanied his family to Paris where, under French law, she was technically free. Recognizing the precariousness of her situation, she negotiated her return to enslavement at Monticello in exchange for extraordinary privileges for herself and the promise of freedom for her unborn children. This act of strategic negotiation, born of a mother's fierce determination to protect her children, stands as a testament to the strength and resilience of enslaved women. The desire for freedom and family reunification burned brightly within the hearts of enslaved people. It fueled acts of resistance, both large and small, from running away to slowing down work. The Civil War, with its promise of emancipation, ignited a mass exodus of enslaved people fleeing plantations and seeking refuge behind Union lines. Hundreds of thousands sought freedom, many driven by the hope of finding lost loved ones. Contraband camps, established by the Union Army to house these newly freed individuals, became havens of hope, filled with the stories of families desperately searching for one another. These camps, while often overcrowded and resource-strapped, represented a beacon of hope, a tangible step toward a future where families could be reunited and live in freedom. The sheer number of children who sought refuge in these camps underscores the profound impact of family separation and the enduring power of hope that fueled the quest for reunification. The whispers in the quarters, the hidden language of family and resilience, tell a story that extends far beyond the confines of the plantation. They speak to the enduring strength of the human spirit, the unbreakable bonds of family, and the unwavering pursuit of freedom in the face of unimaginable adversity. They remind us that even in the darkest of times, the human heart finds ways to nurture love, preserve hope, and whisper dreams of a better future. Chapter 4. A Child's Burden: The Legal and Social Status of Mixed-Race Offspring. The hushed whispers in the slave quarters, the coded conversations held under the cloak of night, often revolved around a subject fraught with complexity and pain: the fate of mixed-race children. These children, born into the brutal system of slavery, entered a world defined by a unique and precarious social standing. Their very existence exposed the hypocrisy of a society that preached freedom and equality while simultaneously denying those rights to an entire class of people based solely on their ancestry. The legal principle of *partus sequitur ventrum*, meaning, that which is brought forth follows the womb, lay at the heart of this injustice. Enacted in Virginia in 1662 and subsequently adopted by other colonies, this principle stood in stark contrast to English common law, which dictated that children inherited their father's status. In the context of slavery, this meant that mixed-race children, regardless of their parentage or even their appearance, inherited the enslaved status of their mothers. This legal doctrine served a dual purpose. It ensured a steady supply of enslaved labor, bolstering the economic engine of the South, and it protected white fathers from any legal or financial obligations to their mixed-race offspring. It was a law designed to perpetuate the institution of slavery while simultaneously shielding white men from the consequences of their actions. The ramifications of *partus sequitur ventrum* were far-reaching and devastating. Even children with predominantly European features, children who might otherwise have been considered white in a different society, were condemned to a life of servitude. They were denied the most basic human rights and freedoms, treated as property to be bought, sold, and exploited like any other enslaved person. Their lighter skin, a visible marker of their white ancestry, offered no protection from the brutal realities of slavery. They were subject to forced labor, physical punishment, and the constant threat of separation from their families. Their very existence was a living testament to the dehumanizing nature of the system. The social implications of mixed-race parentage were equally complex. Within the enslaved community, the concept of pigmentocracy, a social hierarchy based on skin tone, played a significant role. Lighter skin tones were sometimes favored, leading to preferential treatment in labor assignments. Those with lighter complexions might be assigned to work within the master's house, performing domestic tasks, rather than toiling in the fields under the scorching sun. This preferential treatment, while offering a respite from the most backbreaking labor, did not equate to freedom or even basic respect. These individuals remained enslaved, subject to the whims of their masters and vulnerable to sexual exploitation. The favoritism shown towards lighter-skinned enslaved people could also extend to access to education. Some slaveholders, acknowledging their paternity, provided their mixed-race children with opportunities for learning, teaching them to read, write, or acquire a skilled trade. However, these instances were far from the norm. The vast majority of mixed-race children were denied any form of education, their minds as well as their bodies held captive by the system. The presence of mixed-race individuals within the enslaved community often created a complex web of social dynamics. Resentment could simmer beneath the surface as darker-skinned enslaved people witnessed the preferential treatment afforded to those with lighter complexions. This resentment, born of a shared experience of oppression, was a testament to the insidious ways in which the system of slavery pitted enslaved people against one another. The whispers in the quarters, the coded conversations, sometimes carried undertones of this tension, reflecting the complicated social hierarchy that existed within the enslaved community. One recalled anecdote tells of a master who attributed his mixed-race children to Irish laborers on the plantation, a thinly veiled attempt to deflect attention from his own actions and perhaps mitigate potential jealousy or resentment within the enslaved community. Another story tells of a tutor falsely accused of fathering a child with an enslaved woman, a lie designed to protect the master's reputation and maintain the social order. These stories, passed down through generations, offer glimpses into the intricate social dynamics and tensions surrounding mixed-race individuals during slavery. The denial of basic human rights and freedoms was the common thread that bound all enslaved people, regardless of skin tone. Mixed-race children were bought, sold, and exploited just like their darker-skinned counterparts. They were separated from their families, their loved ones torn away without warning, their cries echoing across the auction block. They endured the same physical punishments, the same brutal treatment, the same constant fear that permeated every aspect of their lives. While some slaveholders might have acknowledged their mixed-race children and offered them certain privileges, this was the exception, not the rule. The vast majority experienced the full brutality of slavery, their lighter skin offering no shield against the dehumanizing forces of the system. The story of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson provides a unique and compelling example of the complexities of mixed-race parentage during slavery. Hemings, an enslaved woman owned by Jefferson, accompanied his family to Paris where, under French law, she was technically free. Upon Jefferson's return to America, Hemings, then pregnant, negotiated for extraordinary privileges for herself and the promise of freedom for her future children in exchange for her return to enslavement at Monticello. This negotiation, while demonstrating a remarkable degree of agency within the confines of a system designed to deny her any autonomy, ultimately underscores the limitations of her position. While Jefferson largely adhered to his promise, eventually freeing all of Hemmings's children. Hemmings herself remained enslaved. Her freedom, unlike that of her children, was never guaranteed, a stark reminder of the power imbalance that defined their relationship. The one-drop rule, a social and legal principle that dictated that any person with even a single ancestor of African descent was considered black, further solidified the precarious status of mixed-race individuals. This rule, deeply ingrained in the social fabric of the South, had far-reaching consequences. Legal definitions extended the designation of Negro to individuals with even a small fraction of African ancestry, encompassing mulattoes, quadroons, octoroons, and beyond. This categorization had profound implications for individuals who might otherwise have been considered white or who attempted to pass for white. The possibility of escaping the confines of slavery and entering the world of white privilege existed, but it was a dangerous and often heartbreaking path. Those who chose to pass lived with the constant fear of discovery, the knowledge that their carefully constructed lives could be shattered at any moment. They were forced to sever ties with their families, their communities, their very identities, in order to survive. The experiences of mixed-race children during slavery exposed the deep hypocrisy at the heart of American society. The nation's founding ideals of freedom and equality rang hollow in the face of a system that denied those very rights to an entire class of people based solely on their ancestry. These children, born into a world of contradictions, navigated a complex social landscape, facing prejudice and discrimination from both white and black communities. Their stories, often whispered in secret, passed down through generations, offer a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring strength of family in the face of unimaginable adversity. They serve as a stark reminder of the long shadow cast by slavery and the ongoing struggle for true equality and justice in America. Chapter 5. Between Two Worlds: The Complexities of Identity for Mixed-Race Individuals. The rigidly defined racial landscape of the antebellum South presented unique and often insurmountable challenges for mixed-race individuals, those caught in the ambiguous space between white and black. Born into a society obsessed with racial purity and hierarchy, they navigated a world where they belonged fully to neither group, perpetually straddling two worlds, often with a profound sense of isolation and internal conflict. Their experiences, shaped by the pervasive power dynamics of slavery and the insidious concept of pigmentocracy, reveal a complex and often heartbreaking struggle for identity, belonging, and self-worth. The very notion of a mixed-race identity challenged the carefully constructed racial boundaries of the South. White society, while often complicit in the creation of mixed-race individuals through the exploitation of enslaved women, simultaneously sought to deny their existence or minimize their significance. The one-drop rule, a social and legal principle that classified anyone with even a single ancestor of African descent as black, solidified the precarious status of mixed-race individuals. This rule, deeply ingrained in the social fabric of the South, effectively erased the complexities of mixed-race heritage, forcing individuals into a single racial category regardless of their appearance or ancestry. Within the enslaved community, the concept of pigmentocracy, a social hierarchy based on skin tone, further complicated the search for identity. Lighter skin tones were often associated with proximity to whiteness and, by extension, with higher social standing within the enslaved community. This association stemmed from the fact that many mixed-race individuals were fathered by white slave owners, their lighter skin a visible marker of this parentage. This proximity to whiteness could sometimes translate into tangible advantages. Lighter-skinned enslaved people might be assigned to work in the relative comfort of the master's house, performing domestic tasks, rather than toiling in the fields under the scorching sun. They might also be given opportunities to learn a skilled trade, such as carpentry or blacksmithing, or even, in rare cases, receive some form of education. These advantages, while offering a respite from the most backbreaking and dangerous forms of labor, did not equate to freedom or even basic respect. These individuals remained enslaved, subject to the whims of their masters and vulnerable to the same forms of exploitation and violence as their darker-skinned counterparts. However, these perceived advantages came at a steep social cost. Within the enslaved community, lighter skin could become a source of resentment and suspicion. Darker-skinned enslaved people, already bearing the brunt of the system's brutality, sometimes viewed lighter-skinned individuals as favored by the master, their lighter complexion a symbol of the very power dynamics that oppressed them all. This resentment could manifest in subtle ways, through whispered comments, ostracization, or even physical altercations. One historical example of this tension can be seen in the origins of the dozens, a ritualized game of insults prevalent in African American culture. Some scholars believe this tradition originated, in part, as a form of social commentary directed at lighter-skinned enslaved people, their privileged positions within the plantation hierarchy a source of both envy and disdain. The psychological and emotional toll of navigating this complex social landscape was immense. Mixed-race individuals often experienced a profound sense of isolation, belonging fully to neither the white nor the black community. They were constantly reminded of their ambiguous status, their identity questioned and challenged by both sides of the racial divide. This constant pressure to define themselves within a system that offered no space for their complex heritage could lead to feelings of self-doubt, internalized racism, and a fractured sense of self. The choice of whether to embrace one's black heritage or attempt to pass as white was a deeply personal and often agonizing one. For some, passing offered a path to escaping the brutal realities of slavery and gaining access to the privileges of white society. This decision, however, came at a steep price. Passing required individuals to sever ties with their families, their communities, and their very identities. They lived in constant fear of discovery, knowing that their carefully constructed lives could be shattered at any moment. The emotional and psychological burden of living a double life, constantly looking over their shoulder, took its toll. For others, embracing their black heritage was an act of defiance and solidarity. They chose to identify with the struggles of their community, working to uplift and empower their fellow enslaved people. Historical figures like W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, both of mixed-race ancestry, exemplify the diverse paths taken by mixed-race individuals in the face of these challenges. Du Bois, a staunch advocate for racial equality and a founder of the NAACP, embraced his black identity and dedicated his life to fighting for civil rights. Washington, while also advocating for black advancement, adopted a more conciliatory approach, emphasizing vocational training and economic self-sufficiency. Their different approaches, while sometimes sparking debate, reflected the complex and multifaceted nature of black leadership in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The concept of racial uplift, prevalent during this period, was intricately linked to the concept of pigmentocracy. Lighter-skinned, educated black individuals, often members of a burgeoning black middle class, took on leadership roles within their communities, advocating for education, economic advancement, and social reform. While their efforts undoubtedly contributed to the progress of black communities, the underlying dynamics of pigmentocracy often reinforced existing colorism and class divisions. The pressure to conform to white beauty standards further complicated the issue of identity for darker-skinned individuals. The popularity of hair-straightening products and skin-lightening creams, widely advertised in publications like Ebony and Jet, reflected the internalized racism that permeated even within the black community. These products, marketed as a path to greater social acceptance and economic opportunity, reinforced the notion that whiteness was the ideal, that black features were inherently inferior. This pressure to conform took a psychological toll, contributing to feelings of self-doubt and reinforcing the social hierarchy based on skin tone. The historical context of pigmentocracy and the complex experiences of mixed-race individuals during slavery continue to resonate in the present day. The legacy of slavery, with its emphasis on racial categorization and hierarchy, continues to shape our understanding of race and identity. The ongoing struggle for racial equality must acknowledge and address the complexities of colorism and internalized racism, recognizing the ways in which these historical forces continue to impact individuals and communities. The whispers in the slave quarters, the coded conversations about parentage and identity, may be echoes of the past, but they carry lessons that remain relevant today. They remind us of the enduring power of hope, resilience, and the ongoing pursuit of a society where race is no longer a barrier to belonging, acceptance, and self-worth. Chapter 6. The Price of Silence. How Society Ignored the Plight of Enslaved Mothers and Their Children. The Plantation South, a world built on the backs of enslaved labor, thrived on a carefully constructed culture of silence. This silence, however, was not an absence of sound, but a deafening roar of denial, a collective aversion of the eyes from the brutal realities of slavery. It was a silence that allowed the sexual exploitation of enslaved women to flourish, a silence that condemned their mixed-race children to a life of marginalization and uncertainty. It was a price paid not in monetary currency, but in the erosion of human decency, the corrosion of moral values, and the perpetuation of a system built on injustice. The sexual exploitation of enslaved women was an open secret, a truth whispered in hushed tones within the enslaved community and tacitly acknowledged by white society. White women, often acutely aware of their husbands' infidelities with enslaved women, were caught in a web of social pressure and economic dependence. Speaking out, challenging the status quo, could mean social ostracism, financial ruin, and the loss of their precarious position within the patriarchal structure of the South. Silence, therefore, became a survival tactic, a shield against the potential consequences of challenging the established order. Mary Chestnut, a white diarist of the era, captured this tension in her writings, acknowledging the widespread sexual exploitation of enslaved women while simultaneously expressing disdain for the resulting mixed-race children. Her words, a reflection of the prevailing attitudes of her time, reveal the hypocrisy and moral compromises that permeated the social fabric of the plantation South. The unwritten rules governing relationships between white men and enslaved women were a complex mix of coercion, manipulation, and outright violence. The very notion of consent was rendered meaningless within the master-slave dynamic. An enslaved woman's acquiescence was often a calculated survival tactic, a way to protect herself and her children from the potential wrath of the master. The threat of physical violence, separation from loved ones, or being sold away to an unknown fate loomed large in the lives of enslaved women. These threats, often unspoken but ever present, created an environment of constant fear and vulnerability. The plantation community, both white and black, often turned a blind eye to the realities of these exploitative relationships. White men, bound by a code of silence that protected their own reputations and the institution of slavery, rarely acknowledged their paternity or took responsibility for their mixed-race offspring. The enslaved community, while acutely aware of the master's transgressions, often resorted to coded language and whispered conversations to discuss these sensitive issues. Openly acknowledging the master's paternity could invite retribution, endangering both the mother and her children. The lack of legal protection for enslaved women and their children further entrenched this culture of impunity. The law did not recognize the humanity of enslaved people, let alone their right to family, safety, or freedom. The rape of an enslaved woman was not a crime in the eyes of the legal system. Instead, it was viewed as a trespass against the master's property rights, a chilling testament to the extent to which these women were dehumanized and their bodies deemed property. The legal principle of *partus sequitur ventrum*, meaning, that which is brought forth follows the womb, ensured that children born to enslaved mothers inherited their enslaved status, regardless of their paternity. This legal doctrine condemned mixed-race children to a life of servitude, perpetuating the cycle of exploitation across generations. The mixed-race children born from these forced unions occupied a precarious position within the plantation hierarchy. Their lighter skin, a visible marker of their white ancestry, set them apart from their darker-skinned counterparts. This difference could sometimes translate into preferential treatment, such as being assigned to work in the master's house rather than the fields or being given opportunities to learn a skilled trade. However, these perceived advantages did not shield them from the fundamental realities of slavery. They remained enslaved, subject to the whims of their masters and vulnerable to the same forms of violence and exploitation as other enslaved people. Their existence challenged the carefully constructed racial boundaries of the South, exposing the hypocrisy of a society that preached purity while simultaneously engaging in practices that blurred those very lines. The treatment of mixed-race children varied widely depending on the individual circumstances and the attitudes of their fathers. Some white fathers acknowledged their paternity and provided their mixed-race offspring with certain privileges, such as education or, in rare cases, manumission. The story of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson offers a well-known example of this dynamic. Hemings, enslaved by Jefferson, negotiated for extraordinary privileges, for herself and the eventual freedom of her children in exchange for a return to enslavement at Monticello. While Jefferson ultimately honored his promise, freeing all of Hemings's children, this act of relative benevolence must be viewed within the larger context of his absolute power over her and the inherent injustice of the system. However, more often than not, mixed-race children were simply absorbed into the enslaved population, treated as any other enslaved person, and denied any claim to their father's lineage. Their lighter skin, while potentially affording them certain advantages within the plantation hierarchy, could also become a source of resentment and suspicion within the enslaved community. They were often caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, their identity a source of constant negotiation and internal conflict. The societal silence surrounding the plight of enslaved mothers and their mixed-race children was a deliberate and calculated act of denial. It was a silence maintained through social pressure, economic dependence, and the fear of retribution. It was a silence that allowed the system of oppression to flourish, perpetuating the cycle of exploitation and injustice across generations. The absence of open discussion, the averted gazes, the whispered conversations, these were the tools used to maintain the facade of propriety and protect the institution of slavery. The stories of these women and their children, often hidden in the shadows of history, reveal the true cost of this silence, a cost measured not in dollars and cents, but in the immeasurable suffering of those denied their basic human rights and the enduring legacy of racial inequality that continues to haunt America today. The price of silence was, and continues to be, a heavy one, a debt that must be acknowledged and confronted if we are to ever truly achieve a just and equitable society. Chapter 7. Scars Across Generations: The Enduring Impact of Slavery on Families and Communities. The horrors of slavery didn't end with emancipation. Its tendrils reached into subsequent generations, leaving deep wounds in the fabric of families and communities. This intergenerational trauma, a pervasive and insidious legacy, continues to manifest in myriad ways, shaping the social, economic, and psychological landscape of Black lives in America. The fight for reparations and racial justice is a direct response to this enduring trauma, a testament to the ongoing struggle to heal the wounds of the past and build a more equitable future. Intergenerational trauma is not merely an abstract concept, it is a lived reality for many descendants of enslaved people. It is the inheritance of emotional and psychological wounds, passed down from one generation to the next, like a hidden scar tissue that aches with the memory of past injustices. The forced separation of families during slavery, the brutal severing of kinship bonds, left an indelible mark on the psyches of enslaved people. Parents witnessed their children sold away, siblings torn apart, never to see each other again. This trauma manifested in profound grief, despair, and a sense of rootlessness that permeated family structures for generations. The denial of education and economic opportunities during slavery created a cycle of poverty that continues to disproportionately impact Black communities today. Enslaved people were deliberately kept illiterate, denied access to knowledge and skills that could have empowered them and their descendants. This systematic denial of education created a significant barrier to economic advancement after emancipation, limiting opportunities and perpetuating a cycle of poverty that has proven difficult to break. The lack of generational wealth accumulation, a direct consequence of centuries of forced unpaid labor, further exacerbates this economic disparity. The psychological trauma of slavery also contributed to mental health challenges in later generations. The constant threat of violence, both physical and sexual, the dehumanizing nature of the system, and the pervasive fear that permeated every aspect of enslaved life, took a heavy toll on the mental well-being of enslaved people. This trauma could manifest in a variety of ways, including anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental health conditions. These challenges, often compounded by the ongoing stresses of racism and discrimination, can be passed down through generations, impacting family dynamics, relationships, and overall well-being. The fight for reparations is not simply about financial compensation. It is about acknowledging the profound and lasting harm caused by slavery and taking concrete steps to repair the damage done to families and communities. Reparations can take many forms, from direct financial payments to descendants of enslaved people to investments in Black communities, educational programs, and initiatives aimed at addressing systemic inequalities. Arguments in favor of reparations emphasize the moral imperative to rectify historical injustices, the economic disparities that continued to plague black communities as a direct result of slavery, and the need for a comprehensive approach to healing the wounds of the past. Opponents of reparations often argue that it is impractical to determine who is eligible for compensation, that current generations should not be held responsible for the actions of past generations, and that reparations would be divisive and further exacerbate racial tensions. Despite these challenges, the reparations movement continues to gain momentum, fueled by a growing recognition of the need for restorative justice. Several cities and states have begun exploring reparations initiatives, including Evanston, Illinois, which became the first city in the U.S. to approve a reparations program for its black residents. The ongoing fight for racial justice is a direct continuation of the struggle against slavery. From the civil rights movement to the Black Lives Matter movement, Black Americans have continued to fight for equality and an end to systemic racism. The civil rights movement, with its focus on dismantling legal segregation and securing voting rights, made significant strides in advancing racial equality. However, the legacy of slavery continued to manifest in more subtle forms of discrimination, including housing segregation, unequal access to education and employment, and disproportionate incarceration rates. The Black Lives Matter movement, sparked by the killings of unarmed black individuals by law enforcement, has brought renewed attention to the issue of systemic racism and police brutality, galvanizing a new generation of activists and demanding accountability and transformative change. These contemporary struggles are directly linked to the injustices of slavery. The denial of education and economic opportunities during slavery created a foundation for the economic disparities that persist today. The dehumanizing ideologies that justified slavery continue to fuel racist attitudes and discriminatory practices. The legal system, designed to protect the institution of slavery, continues to disproportionately impact black communities, contributing to higher incarceration rates and unequal access to justice. The fight for racial justice is not just about addressing individual acts of discrimination. It is about dismantling the systemic structures that perpetuate inequality and creating a society where all people have the opportunity to thrive. The stories of enslaved women, like Sally Hemings, who bore several children fathered by Thomas Jefferson, offer a poignant reminder of the human cost of slavery. Hemings's story, with its complexities and contradictions, highlights the power dynamics inherent in the master-slave relationship. Her negotiation for extraordinary privileges for herself and the eventual freedom of her children demonstrates a remarkable degree of agency within a system designed to deny her any autonomy. However, her story also underscores the limitations of her position, the fact that her own freedom remained contingent on the will of her enslaver. The whispers in the slave quarters, the coded conversations about parentage and identity, the stories passed down through generations. These are not merely echoes of the past, they are living testaments to the enduring impact of slavery. They remind us that the fight for reparations and racial justice is not just about addressing historical wrongs. It is about creating a more just and equitable future for all. It is about healing the wounds of the past and building a society where the legacy of slavery no longer casts a shadow over the lives of Black Americans. It is a fight for recognition, for repair, and for the realization of the unfulfilled promise of freedom and equality for all. The lives of children born to enslaved black women and white masters in the antebellum South reveal a complex and often heartbreaking chapter of American history. These children, born into a system designed to deny their very humanity, navigated a world of contradictions and precarious social standing. The legal principle of *partus sequitur ventrum*, which dictated that children inherited their mother's enslaved status, condemned these mixed-race individuals to a life of servitude regardless of their paternity. Within the enslaved community, the concept of pigmentocracy created a complex social hierarchy based on skin tone, where lighter skin sometimes afforded preferential treatment but also invited resentment and suspicion. These children were often caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither the white nor the black community, their identity a source of constant negotiation and internal conflict. The pervasive sexual exploitation of enslaved women, often perpetrated by white masters, was shrouded in a culture of silence. White women, caught in a web of social pressure and economic dependence, often turned a blind eye to the suffering of enslaved women. This silence, maintained through social pressure and fear of retribution, allowed the system of oppression to flourish. The lack of legal protection for enslaved women further entrenched this culture of impunity. Despite the brutal realities of slavery, enslaved families demonstrated remarkable resilience. They created their own rituals and traditions, forging unbreakable bonds amidst the constant threat of separation. The whispers in the slave quarters, the coded conversations, and the stories passed down through generations reveal a deep-seated desire for freedom and family reunification. The fight for reparations and racial justice is a direct response to the enduring trauma of slavery, a testament to the ongoing struggle to heal the wounds of the past and build a more equitable future. These historical findings have profound implications for our understanding of race, identity, and the enduring legacy of slavery in America. They challenge us to confront the uncomfortable truths of our past and to recognize the ways in which historical injustices continue to shape our present. The concept of intergenerational trauma, passed down through generations, sheds light on the persistent disparities that exist in Black communities today. These disparities are not simply the result of individual choices or circumstances. They are the product of systemic inequalities rooted in the history of slavery and its aftermath. Understanding this history is crucial to dismantling these systems of oppression and creating a truly just and equitable society. Looking forward, this research can inform policies and initiatives aimed at addressing systemic racism and promoting racial healing. It can help us to develop more effective strategies for addressing the root causes of inequality and creating a society where all people have the opportunity to thrive. The stories of resilience and resistance demonstrated by enslaved families can inspire us to continue the fight for justice and equality. What are your thoughts on this complex and often overlooked aspect of American history? Share your questions and comments below. We encourage you to continue exploring this important topic and to engage in meaningful conversations about race, identity, and the ongoing struggle for racial justice in America. Subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content, and don't hesitate to suggest topics for future videos. Never stop learning, never stop questioning, and never stop striving for a better future.